This was the moment a Utah driver's life was instantly put in danger. A pickup truck rear-ended the SUV at a railroad crossing, pushing it onto the tracks at the worst time possible. As the crossing arms came down, the driver tried to reverse but got stuck. Footage showed the conductor wailing on the horn and hitting the emergency brakes, but there was no way to stop in time. With the massive train rapidly approaching, the driver had no choice but to abandon the vehicle and run. Moments later, the train slammed into it, instantly destroying the car and causing over $100,000 in damage. Police later cited the pickup truck for following too closely, saying the entire incident began with the rear-end collision. This man was trying to close a metal gate when something went horribly wrong. As he pulled the two metal doors together, an electrical fault had apparently energized the gate, electrocuting him immediately. Unable to let go, he remained stuck to the gate as electricity coursed through his body. Luckily, his coworker realized what was happening and quickly drop-kicked him away from the gate, instead of grabbing him directly, which could have gotten them both electrocuted. Amazingly, the man survived. If his friend hesitated for even a few more seconds or approached the situation any differently, the outcome most likely would have been much worse. Steven Hillenburg, the legendary creator of SpongeBob SquarePants, was a former marine biology teacher who turned his love of ocean life into one of the most successful animated TV shows in history. But in 2017, he revealed he'd been diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, a progressive neurodegenerative disease that slowly destroys the body's ability to move, speak, and eventually breathe. Hillenburg continued working on SpongeBob during his illness before dying in California in 2018 at the young age of 57. The character he created went on to outlive him, becoming one of the most recognizable animated figures in the world. Dutch artist and inventor Bart Jansen became known for turning dead animals into functioning drones after mounting motors and propellers onto taxidermied pets and wildlife. His most famous creation was Orville, a pet cat that was killed by a car and later transformed into a flying drone because Jansen said he wanted to give him a new life. He's also created drone versions of an ostrich, a shark, and several other animals, and later announced plans to build an airborne drone from a dead cow. Jansen says the projects are meant to blur the line between life, death, and technology. In California, haunted house performer Morgan Fowler, known as Trickster the Clown, spent years grooming teenage volunteers before convincing some to abandon school, distance themselves from their families, and live under his control. Investigators said victims were forced to sign contracts and obey strict rules, as Fowler built a cult-like following around himself. Authorities later uncovered evidence that multiple minors had been sexually abused inside a dungeon-like room he had constructed inside his garage. The investigation identified 18 victims, and Fowler was sentenced to 215 years in prison. In 1975, 17-year-old Leslie Whittle was kidnapped from her home in Shropshire by serial killer Donald Nielsen. He blindfolded her, took her to a remote sewer shaft, and chained her by the neck while demanding a 50,000-pound ransom from her family. When the ransom exchange failed, Nielsen abandoned her alone in complete darkness and never returned. Weeks later, rescuers found her body still hanging from the chain. Investigators concluded she eventually died from hypothermia and starvation after being left alone underground. Nielsen was later convicted of her murder and sentenced to life in prison, remaining behind bars until his death in 2011. Before playing Frenchie on The Boys, Tomer Capone spent years serving in the Israel Defense Forces, including during the 2006 Lebanon War. He's described taking part in night raids and checkpoint operations in the West Bank, where soldiers would enter homes in the dark, detain suspects, and confront civilians in tense and sometimes violent situations. Capone said years of exposure to violence, fear, and the constant pressure of military operations took a severe psychological toll, eventually culminating in a mental breakdown near the end of his service. Long before he became known for playing a troubled character haunted by his past, Capone was struggling with trauma from real-life experiences he said never fully left him. In 1999, 15-year-old ballet student Rachel Barber was one of Melbourne's most promising young dancers when one day she was lured away by her former babysitter, 19-year-old Carolyn Robertson. For years, Robertson had become obsessively fixated on Rachel, studying her face, copying her handwriting, and telling others she wished she could be her. After convincing Rachel to meet her alone, Robertson strangled the teenager to death and buried her body in a shallow grave in a forest outside of Melbourne. Investigators later uncovered journals revealing that Robertson's obsession had gone far beyond jealousy. She'd spent years fantasizing about taking Rachel's place and living the life she believed should have been hers. Robertson eventually pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but she was released on parole in 2008 after serving about 9 years behind bars. This was the moment a diver tried to catch a crab and instantly regretted it. The diver used a pair of tongs to grab a smooth box crab on the seafloor, but before he could take her away, another crab emerged from the seabed and clamped onto her, refusing to let go. Smooth box crabs are known for protecting their partners. When danger appears, mates will often pick up their mates and carry them to safety, hiding them beneath the sand before attempting to defend them from whatever threat remains. Realizing he was watching a mate trying to protect his partner, the diver decided not to separate them. He even rewarded the loving pair with a piece of fish before swimming away. After a bird lost its ability to fly, its owner built a tiny transparent cabin beneath the drone so it could be carried through the air. Videos showed the bird riding inside the custom enclosure as the drone drifted off, allowing it to experience the sky again despite being unable to use its wings. In 2019, a man attempted to rob UFC fighter Poliana Viana while she waited for an Uber in Rio de Janeiro, but she quickly fought back, landing 2 punches and a kick, before pinning him down with a rear naked choke until police arrived. The would-be robber was later taken into custody after receiving treatment for his injuries. This Russian woman experienced what may be a worst-case scenario while riding an elevator. Just moments after the doors closed, the elevator's power unit suddenly exploded, sending flames shooting from the control panel and filling the small cabin with thick smoke. Trapped inside with nowhere to go, she was suddenly confined inside a metal box filling with fire and toxic fumes. In enclosed spaces, smoke inhalation can become deadly long before the flames themselves, with a lack of oxygen and exposure to toxic gases causing people to lose consciousness within minutes. As the damage continued to spread, the woman could do nothing but wait and hope for the elevator to reach a floor. Fortunately, the doors eventually opened, allowing her to escape the nightmare. This diver came terrifyingly close to being swallowed by a whale. He was swimming among a dense school of fish when a massive mouth suddenly emerged from the darkness beside him. The whale narrowly missed pulling him completely into its mouth, instead just stealing one of his flippers as it surged past. But despite how terrifying it looked, the whale likely never intended to target him. Baleen whales are filter feeders that feed on fish and krill, and while their mouths are enormous, their throats are typically the size of a human fist, far too small to swallow an adult. Had he been engulfed, he likely would have been trapped inside the whale's mouth for a few terrifying moments, before being spat back out as the whale filtered its catch. However, had he been dealing with a sperm whale, this would have been a much different story. Before becoming famous as Dracula, Saruman, and Count Dooku, Christopher Lee witnessed the last public execution in France. In 1939, while visiting Paris as a teenager, he joined a crowd gathered outside a prison to watch convicted serial killer Eugene Weidman be executed by guillotine. Lee later recalled the atmosphere as disturbing, describing spectators climbing onto roofs just for a glimpse of the execution. Because the crowd became so unruly and the spectacle was described as shameful, the French government banned executions immediately following Weidman's death. During the Chechen Wars, Surgeon Kasan Bayev was reportedly the only doctor serving nearly 80,000 civilians in parts of war-torn Chechnya. As artillery strikes and bombings flooded makeshift hospitals with casualties, Bayev often worked for days without sleep, performing amputations, emergency brain surgeries, and other life-saving procedures with little anesthesia and makeshift medical tools. During one particular 48-hour period, he reportedly carried out 67 amputations and 8 brain surgeries. Refusing to choose sides, he treated wounded Chechen fighters, Russian soldiers, and civilians alike, leading to both sides accusing him of helping the enemy and threatening him with death. In 2016, comedian Patton Oswalt lost his wife, true crime writer Michelle McNamara, after she died unexpectedly in her sleep at their California home. She'd spent years obsessively researching an unidentified serial killer and rapist she helped popularize under the name Golden State Killer. After her death, Oswalt worked to publish her unfinished book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. 2 years later, investigators arrested Joseph James D'Angelo, linking him to at least 13 murders and dozens of rapes that had terrorized California for decades. Declawing a cat is far more horrific than simply removing its claws. The procedure amputates the last bone of each toe, essentially the feline equivalent of cutting off a human finger at the last knuckle. Because cats walk directly on their toes, declawing can cause chronic pain, nerve damage, arthritis, and lifelong mobility issues. Due to animal welfare concerns, the practice has been banned or heavily restricted in much of Europe, though it still remains legal in most parts of the United States. From 2011 to 2013, Texas neurosurgeon Christopher Dunge turned routine spinal operations into disasters, leaving 33 of his 38 patients dead, paralyzed, or permanently maimed. Patients woke up unable to walk, suffering chronic pain, nerve damage, severed vocal cords, or life-threatening injuries after Dunge cut through healthy issues, operated on the wrong areas of the spine, and in some cases left surgical hardware improperly placed inside their bodies. During one surgery, a fellow surgeon reportedly had to physically stop him after he continued causing catastrophic damage to a patient's spine. Despite mounting complaints, multiple hospitals allowed him to simply resign rather than formally report him, enabling him to keep finding new jobs and patients. By the time his medical license was finally revoked, 2 patients were dead and dozens of others were left with life-altering injuries. He was later sentenced to life in prison for the repeated malpractice. In 1994, pro wrestler Mick Foley was competing in Germany when a stunt went catastrophically wrong. While performing as Cactus Jack, his head became tangled in the ring ropes as he was thrown over the top rope. As his body fell toward the floor, the ropes violently tore part of his left ear from his head. A large section of his ear landed on the wrestling mat and was picked up by the ref, while Foley simply continued the match, initially unaware that something even happened to his ear. Surgeons later attempted to reattach it, but the procedure was unsuccessful, leaving him permanently disfigured. In 1932, outlaw Clyde Barrow was imprisoned at Texas's notorious Eastham prison farm, where inmates constantly endured brutal labor and violence. Desperate to avoid working in the fields, Barrow amputated 2 of his own toes, only to learn 6 days later that his mother had already secured his release. Barrow ended up walking with a permanent limp for the rest of his life as a result. While at the same prison, he was repeatedly sexually assaulted by another inmate and later retaliated by crushing the man's skull with a metal pipe, though a fellow prisoner serving life eventually claimed responsibility for the killing since he was a fan of Clyde's.
What's happened to you, alright? You've been stabbed? Whereabouts? Don't think you have, mate. Hand? Put the hand in the cuff, mate.
That was the moment Henry Novak was arrested for the crime of being stabbed. In December of 2025, 18-year-old college student Henry Novak was walking home after a night out in Southampton, England, when he encountered 23-year-old Vikram Digwa, a man prosecutors later described as having an obsession with weapons. After a brief confrontation on the street, Digwa stabbed Henry 5 times with a large ceremonial dagger, including a chest wound that caused catastrophic internal bleeding. After the attack, Digwa told responding officers that Henry had racially abused and assaulted him. Acting on Digwa's account, police initially treated the severely wounded teenager as a suspect and handcuffed him on the pavement. Body cam footage later showed Henry repeatedly telling officers that he'd been stabbed, was bleeding, and couldn't breathe as he lay dying in handcuffs.
What's happened to you, alright? You've been stabbed? Whereabouts? Don't think you have, mate.
Investigators later determined Digwa's allegations were completely false, fabricated to cover up the fact that he'd just fatally stabbed a man out of nowhere. Henry died at the scene shortly afterward, and Digwa was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. After the footage was released, Hampshire police apologized for handcuffing Henry as he lay dying. As of now, no officers have been publicly charged or disciplined, but the case has prompted widespread calls for someone to be held accountable. Before becoming a Hollywood star, Tiffany Haddish spent years enduring a childhood of abuse and instability. After a car accident left her mother with severe brain damage, Haddish says her mom became extremely violent, and by age 13, she and her siblings had been removed from the home and placed into foster care. Haddish later revealed she was molested while in foster care, experienced periods of homelessness, and at times lived out of her car. She said that comedy became a survival mechanism, the only thing that kept her from breaking under the trauma she endured while growing up. In 1989, 4-year-old Li Jingwei was abducted from his village in China after a neighbor allegedly lured him away with the promise of seeing cars, a rare sight in the rural area where he lived. He was trafficked hundreds of miles away and grew up never seeing his parents again, relying only on fragmented childhood memories of his home. More than 3 decades later, at age 37, he drew a hand-drawn sketch of the village from memory and posted it online. The map instantly went viral, helping authorities identify his hometown and reunite him with his family 33 years after he was kidnapped. Actor Jesse Eisenberg donated one of his kidneys to a complete stranger in 2025 after learning more about the organ shortage crisis. During the operation, doctors discovered the intended recipient had become too sick to receive the transplant, so Eisenberg's kidney was redirected to a different stranger elsewhere in the country. He never learned the recipient's identity, recovered without major complications, and later said he had no regrets, joking that he wished he had more kidneys to give. In 1943, Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann became the first person to intentionally take LSD after accidentally being exposed to it days earlier in a laboratory. Believing the amount was insignificant, he swallowed 250 micrograms, a dose now considered to be extremely powerful. Within a few hours, Hoffman was plunged into a waking nightmare. He experienced overwhelming hallucinations, felt his body and mind breaking apart, became convinced he'd been poisoned, and feared he was permanently losing his sanity. At one point, he believed he was dying and that the world around him had transformed into something sinister and unrecognizable. The 6-hour ordeal became the first documented LSD trip in history and is now remembered as Bicycle Day, after the ride home during which the drug's effects had reached their terrifying peak. A childless Brazilian billionaire reportedly left his entire $1.14 billion fortune to soccer star Neymar despite never meeting him. In his will, the businessman said he identified with Neymar personally, admired his relationship with his father, and believed the athlete was not self-serving, making him the sole heir to a fortune worth over $1 billion. The inheritance is reportedly still subject to court approval. A fox that wandered onto thin ice became trapped when the lake froze around it. After it died, people cut the animal free and left its ice-encased body standing upright as a grim warning marker to keep others from venturing onto the dangerous ice. On D-Day, paratrooper John Steele's parachute became tangled on a church steeple in the middle of a firefight, leaving him suspended helplessly above the battlefield for hours. Unable to escape and surrounded by violent gunfire, he survived by hanging motionless and pretending to be dead while soldiers fought and died beneath him. Today, a mannequin hangs from the same steeple to commemorate his ordeal. This was the horrifying moment a little Chinese girl realized that escalators are not toys. Somehow the child ended up hanging from the outside of an escalator, gripping the moving handrail as it carried her higher and higher above the floor. Unable to pull herself up or climb back down, she was dragged all the way to the top where her body became wedged against a glass barrier. As the escalator continued moving, the handrail kept pulling on her arms, leaving her completely trapped and dangling helplessly above the drop. Luckily, before anything bad could happen, 2 men rushed over, grabbed the girl, and pulled her to safety. Escalator accidents may seem rare, but falls, entrapments, and mechanical incidents have caused serious injuries and deaths around the world. This was the moment a woman instantly disappeared beneath the sidewalk. After getting off a motorcycle taxi in Brazil, she stepped onto what appeared to be a normal manhole cover. Instead, the cover suddenly gave way beneath her, sending her plunging to the hole below. The fall happened so quickly that she barely had time to react, and found herself immediately trapped in the shaft with murky water up to her chest. Luckily, a shocked bystander saw her fall in and ran over to the rescue. She survived with moderate injuries and was eventually pulled from the hole by people nearby. Investigators later determined that 2 men attempted to steal the cover earlier that morning and failed to put it back securely. Though incidents like this are rare, manhole falls can be deadly. Just weeks earlier, a 56-year-old grandma in New York was killed this exact way. In 2016, Canadian graphic novelist Blake Leibel brutally murdered his fiancée Iana Cassian just weeks after she gave birth to their daughter. Prosecutors said Leibel held Cassian captive inside their West Hollywood apartment for hours, beating her, cutting her with sharp objects, and inflicting catastrophic injuries while she was still alive. Medical testimony indicated she remained conscious through much of the attack, ultimately dying from massive blood loss and head trauma after what prosecutors described as a prolonged torture session. Investigators found that her scalp had been removed, portions of her face had been torn away, and nearly all of her blood had drained from her body through the wounds. Prosecutors argued that Leibel was jealous of the attention being given to their newborn baby, and pointed to similarities between the crime and violent imagery in his graphic novel Syndrome. In 2018, he was convicted of first-degree murder, torture, and aggravated mayhem, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This was the moment a 5-year-old boy fell into a gorilla enclosure and found himself surrounded by one of the world's most powerful primates. After plunging roughly 15 feet into the gorilla exhibit at Jersey Zoo in 1986, the unconscious child lay helpless on the concrete floor as several gorillas approached. Horrified spectators feared they were about to witness a fatal attack. But instead, the troop's dominant silverback Jambo moved toward the boy and positioned himself between him and the other gorillas. As the child remained motionless, Jambo watched over him, gently stroked his back, and kept the rest of the troop at a distance. For several tense minutes, the 450-pound silverback stood guard over the injured boy while zoo staff prepared a rescue. When keepers finally entered the enclosure, Jambo calmly backed off and allowed them to carry the child to safety. The boy survived with a broken hand and minor injuries, and footage of the incident was broadcast around the world. At a time when gorillas were often portrayed as violent, dangerous beasts in movies and pop culture, Jambo's actions helped change public perception of the species worldwide, showing millions of people a gentler and more protective side of one of humanity's closest relatives. Now at this time, I ask you all to hold a moment of silence for Harambe, who suffered a much more tragic outcome in a similar circumstance. Thank you. In 2022, Fiona Hooker developed a rare pregnancy complication that essentially made her body allergic to her own unborn baby. At 31 weeks pregnant, a few itchy spots around her belly button rapidly spread into agonizing blisters that eventually covered much of her body. Doctors later diagnosed her with pemphigoid gestationis, a rare autoimmune disorder affecting roughly 1 in every 50,000 pregnancies. They believe genes inherited from her son's father caused her immune system to mistake proteins linked to her baby and placenta as a threat, triggering an aggressive attack on her own skin. The pain became so severe that after giving birth, she struggled to even hold her newborn son without agony. Although the blisters eventually subsided, the condition can flare up again with future pregnancies, hormonal changes, or even her menstrual cycle for the rest of her life. In the early 1900s, New Jersey Asylum director Henry Cotton became convinced that mental illness was caused by hidden infections poisoning the brain. To cure his patients, he ordered the removal of teeth, tonsils, stomachs, colons, and reproductive organs, often performing multiple surgeries on the same person. Many patients died from the operations, with some estimates placing the mortality rate at over 45%. Despite the staggering death toll, Cotton spent years promoting the procedures as a medical breakthrough, while dismissing clear evidence that they were killing the very people he claimed to be saving. This koi fish is unsettling thousands of people online because its markings look disturbingly human. The effect is so convincing that many viewers say it triggers the uncanny valley, the same discomfort people feel when something looks almost human but not quite. This fossil is so rare that it only forms in a handful of places on Earth under perfect conditions. This is a coral geode, created when an ancient coral colony was slowly replaced by minerals over millions of years while crystals grew inside. The result is one of the rarest and most beautiful fossils ever discovered. For a few minutes each year, the setting sun lines up perfectly with Horsetail Fall in Yosemite, causing the water to glow bright orange and creating the illusion that molten lava is pouring from one of the most famous cliffs in America. Photographers travel from all over the world hoping to witness it, but many leave empty-handed when weather or clouds ruin the effect. When everything finally aligns, the mountain briefly looks like it's erupting. Just a few minutes later, the illusion disappears as quickly as it arrives. Oliver Tree has reportedly died after 2 helicopters collided mid-air over Rio de Janeiro, Brazil on June 14, 2026. The 32-year-old musician spent years building a career around chaos, fake retirements, outrageous stunts, and songs about heartbreak, self-destruction, and disaster. This time, however, the catastrophe was very real. The helicopters crashed into an electric vehicle storage yard, where the wreckage ignited a massive fire that spread to at least 20 cars. All 6 people on board the aircraft were killed. Videos appearing to show the collision and aftermath have begun circulating online, with many outlets declining to share the footage because of its graphic nature. Oliver released a new album just a few weeks ago and was in the middle of a world tour. Best known for viral hits like Life Goes On and Miss You, he died just 2 weeks before his 33rd birthday as investigators worked to determine what caused the tragic collision. Jerry, better known online as Gazelle Beauty, was born with megalocornea, an extremely rare genetic disorder that causes the corneas to grow far larger than usual. The condition gave Jerry unusually large eyes from birth, leading many childhood photos to go viral because of their unsettling appearance. While often mistaken for a cosmetic trait, megalocornea is a lifelong medical condition that can be associated with vision problems, light sensitivity, and an increased risk of serious eye complications later on in life. The disorder is so rare that very few doctors will ever encounter a patient with it during their entire careers. In 2024, 26-year-old American YouTuber Elliot Eastman repeatedly told his audience he feared armed men would come for him while living in a conflict-prone region of the Philippines. After marrying a local woman and openly documenting his life, income, and whereabouts online, Eastman randomly ended one of his live streams without saying goodbye. Roughly 2 hours later, armed men reportedly arrived at his home, shot him, and abducted him by boat. Despite extensive searches, his body was never recovered, leaving his ultimate fate officially unsolved but widely presumed fatal. For more than 50 years, this man kept a secret so unbelievable that even his own family had no idea who he really was. In 1969, 20-year-old bank teller Ted Conrad stole $215,000 from a bank in Cleveland, equivalent to nearly $2 million today, and simply disappeared without a trace. The FBI spent more than 50 years pursuing leads, making the case one of the longest-running fugitive investigations in U.S. history. But Conrad successfully built an entire new life near Boston under the name Thomas Randell. He eventually married, raised a daughter, became a golf enthusiast, and lived as an ordinary suburban family man while investigators remained unaware of his whereabouts. But in 2021, while dying of lung cancer, he finally admitted to his daughter that he was one of America's most wanted fugitives and begged her to keep it secret. Months after his death, investigators used old documents and genealogy records to confirm his identity, finally closing the case 52 years after the theft. His daughter later revealed the story to the world through a podcast about her father's hidden past. In Maryland Heights, Missouri, 28-year-old Danielle Uskovich was attending the Point Fest Rock Festival when she was accidentally kicked in the head by a crowd surfer during a performance by the band Sleep Theory. At first, she thought she had only suffered a minor injury, but days later she developed severe headaches and was rushed to the hospital where doctors discovered a brain bleed. Danielle subsequently suffered 2 strokes, underwent emergency surgery to remove multiple blood clots and a large amount of blood from her skull, and was placed into a medically induced coma. Despite doctors' efforts, she died 10 days after the incident, just months before her planned wedding. In Poland, a 35-year-old man was recently rushed to the hospital after using an axe to sever part of his own genitals in what he reportedly described as an attempt to eliminate his sexual urges. Emergency responders found him suffering from catastrophic blood loss, and surgeons spent hours performing emergency reconstructive surgery to save his life. Doctors later said the injury carried a high risk of fatal hemorrhaging and permanent complications. This heartbreaking clip from China shows the moment a little girl watched her dad sell her beloved pet to a dog meat buyer. Video shows the child sobbing as she desperately held onto the dog's chain and even tried to return the money from the sale in a last attempt to stop it. Despite her efforts, the buyer took the dog away as her dad simply laughed it off. In some parts of China, dogs have been historically sold into the dog meat trade, though the practice has become increasingly controversial and less common in recent years. The footage quickly went viral across Chinese social media, with many viewers expressing outrage and sympathy for the young girl. Thai Buddhist monk Luang Pho Dang died while meditating in 1973 at the age of 79. Following his wishes, his body was placed in a glass coffin at a temple on the Thai island of Koh Samui rather than being cremated. More than 50 years later, the mummified corpse remains remarkably preserved, though time eventually caused the eyes to deteriorate and collapse. Temple caretakers later placed sunglasses over the empty eye sockets so that his appearance would not frighten small children visiting the temple. The monk's mummified body can still be viewed today, seated upright in the same meditation position, making it one of the world's most unusual and unsettling religious displays. Here's a rare look at what a camel's toe actually looks like. Unlike most hoofed animals, camels have two toes connected by a large flexible pad that spreads out under their weight. This unique adaptation helps distribute pressure across soft sand, preventing the animal from sinking as it crosses the desert. This might sound impossible at first glance, but every single tile in this pattern is actually identical. The illusion is created by the way the tiles are rotated and arranged, tricking the brain into seeing different shapes, curves, and pathways, even though only one tile design is repeated over and over across the entire surface. Here's an incredible photo of what happens when a solar eclipse shines through the tiny gaps between a tree's leaves. Each small opening acts like a natural pinhole camera, projecting an image of the sun onto the ground below. Because the moon is partially blocking the sun, every projection takes on the same crescent shape instead of appearing as a normal circle of light. The result is thousands of miniature eclipses scattered across the pavement, all changing shape in real time as the solar eclipse progresses. A family celebration of the New York Knicks' first NBA championship in 53 years ended in tragedy after neighbors reportedly mistook the sound of cheering for a woman screaming in distress and called 911. When LAPD officers arrived at the Los Angeles apartment, they encountered Jameson, a 2-year-old golden retriever, St. Bernard, and poodle mix wearing a Knicks jersey. Police claim the dog charged at an officer, while the family insists the dog was friendly and never would have posed a threat. An officer then fatally shot Jameson outside the home just 10 minutes after the championship victory. Video of his owner crying over his body quickly spread across social media, sparking widespread outrage and demands for the release of the police body cam footage. The neighbor who made the 911 call later said they felt terrible about what had happened and had genuinely believed that someone inside was in actual danger. A fundraiser launched to help pay for Jameson's cremation and seek justice for the family has already raised more than $125,000 as the shooting remains under investigation. This man made a vow to never sit down or lie flat for 12 years in an effort to grow closer to God. To maintain the vow, he sleeps while standing using suspended supports like the one seen here. Years of continuous standing have reportedly left his legs severely swollen, with damaged veins, chronic fluid buildup, thick blackened skin, and permanent deformities caused by constantly fighting gravity. But despite the excruciating pain and physical deterioration, he's continued the practice as an act of extreme religious devotion. A 41-year-old man with advanced HIV developed mysterious tumors that didn't match any known human cancer. Doctors later discovered that the growths were actually cancer cells from a tapeworm living inside his body, the first known case of cancer spreading from a parasite into a human. Here's a clip showing the terrifying teeth of a boa constrictor. While boas kill their prey with constriction rather than venom, their mouths are lined with dozens of long razor-sharp teeth that curve backwards like hooks. These teeth are designed to grab and hold struggling animals, making it nearly impossible for prey to pull free once the snake has bitten down. Unlike humans, boas also continuously replace their teeth throughout their lives, ensuring that they always have a fresh set ready for hunting. That is horrifying. Former child star DeVay Chase became famous in the early 2000s for voicing Chihiro in Spirited Away and Lilo in Lilo and Stitch, while also terrifying audiences as Samara in The Ring. She quickly became one of Hollywood's most recognizable young actors, appearing in major films and television shows before largely disappearing from the spotlight. According to recent reports, she spent years struggling with personal problems, financial instability, and declining health. Friends claimed she became increasingly isolated, while reports alleged she'd been living in poverty and even spending time in Los Angeles' Skid Row area in the months before her death. Her boyfriend later said she'd been suffering from severe malnutrition before being hospitalized with meningitis and multiple serious blood infections. The actress reportedly weighed less than 80 pounds by the time she was hospitalized. The infections reportedly progressed to sepsis, causing multiple organ failure, and Chase died on June 16, 2026 at just 35 years old. This was the moment a jogger suddenly shoved the woman into the path of an oncoming double-decker bus and then kept running. Footage from London's Putney Bridge shows the woman being pushed directly into traffic just seconds before the bus reached her. Miraculously, the driver swerved just in time, missing her by inches and preventing what could have been a horrific death. The shocking footage sparked a massive manhunt, but despite clear video of the incident, police couldn't identify the runner. For years, the mystery remained unsolved as investigators searched tirelessly for the man responsible. Nearly a decade later, authorities finally tracked him down and revealed his identity: Nicholas Brandrum, a wealthy investment banker. He was soon arrested in 2025 and ultimately convicted of assault. This was the moment Dutch aerobatic pilot Noreen Melkomjohn came terrifyingly close to being ripped from her aircraft thousands of feet above the ground. During a high-speed aerobatic flight, the plane's canopy suddenly burst open and shattered, blasting her with hurricane-force wind and flying debris. The force was so intense that she temporarily lost vision in one eye and struggled to breathe. Yet she somehow maintained control of the aircraft while continuing to perform emergency procedures. Despite the severe wind pressure and the constant risk of losing control, Noreen managed to safely land the plane and walked away alive from an incident that easily could have turned fatal within seconds.